wasn't really there. It was made up in your mind, could be anyone, anywhere. 'Cause you'd been living in a world of your own design, undermined. In another place, other space and time. As the dust clears and it all starts to disappear, it may get harder, 'cause you just restarted. And wherever you are, land on another star. It may get harder, 'cause you just restarted.
You better get real, real, real and realize that the situation's going nowhere. Because you act so tough, now totally lost control. So please try to understand that if I could, I'd call and I would be there. And if I didn't hurt so much, you know I'd give you it all. You know I'd give you it all.
Imagine if the friend that you thought you knew wasn't really true. It just existed in your head, the reflection news wasn't you. Completely unaware, could be anywhere, anytime. 'Cause there was a shift in the paradigm. As the dust clears and it all starts to disappear, it may get harder, 'cause you just restarted. And wherever you are, land on another star. It may get harder, 'cause you just restarted.
You better get real, real, real and realize that the situation's going nowhere. Because you act so tough, now totally lost control. So please try to understand that if I could, I'd call and I would be there. And if I didn't hurt so much, you know I'd give you it all.
As many of us can see and feel in these times of increasing turbulence, the world we collectively inhabit is becoming a melting pot of craziness that has bubbled over the top. In July of this year alone, we have seen expressions of this boiling point manifest in various horrible ways: more police brutality, the specter of engineered race war and reactionary cop shootings, for example, Dallas, Baton Rouge, Black Lives Matter, and the terrorist attacks in Nice, France, and Munich, Germany. Then, of course, we have the ongoing pathological election parade in the US, based on the illusion of choice, and its attendant distractions, the Brexit fiasco and subsequent fallout, a staged military coup in Turkey, and last but not least, the unmitigated idiocy of the Pokemon Go hype and craze that has literally taken over the minds of millions of people worldwide, an augmented reality trend which not only ties into the obvious goal of data mining and increased surveillance opportunities, but also reflects another de-evolutionary stage in the AI and transhumanism agenda. The long-range goal of introducing fun apps like Pokemon Go into the mainstream is to get people even more disembodied, reactive, controlled, head-centric and hooked on external technology than they already are. It's efficient and concealed behavioral control programming, turning people into robot zombies out of their own, manipulated, free will, priming them to accept, and get addicted to, technological advances that will influence their emotions, behaviors, and actions as they become more and more machine-like, programmed and predictable. When people have access to a 24-hour spin cycle of fear-based propaganda, mainstream media, that is churning out story after story that presents a world in the grip of ever-worsening chaos, these escapist fantasies become even more appealing. The combination is a brilliant trap of agreement that serves the powers that be and their hyperdimensional overlords very well. A quote by G.I. Gurdjieff, In Search of the Miraculous, quote, "People are machines. Machines have to be blind and unconscious, they cannot be otherwise, and all their actions have to correspond to their nature. Everything happens. No one does anything. Progress and civilization, in the real meaning of these words, can appear only as the result of conscious efforts. They cannot appear as the result of unconscious mechanical actions. And what conscious effort can there be in machines? And if one machine is unconscious, then 100 machines are unconscious, and so are 1,000 machines, or 100,000, or 1,000,000. And the unconscious activity of 1,000,000 machines must necessarily result in destruction and extermination. It is precisely in unconscious involuntary manifestations that all evil lies. You do not yet understand and cannot imagine all the results of this evil. But the time will come when you will understand." End quote. The negative realm agenda. It's astonishing to think that what has just been described above is merely the visible tip of a massive iceberg, in relation to agendas that are playing out, overtly and covertly, in our world right now. All these seemingly unrelated events, from a 3D surface level, are actually all interconnected, and tie into social engineering, mind control, and the hyperdimensional matrix long con, locking humanity into a frequency prison, redirecting people's free will into alignment with an end game, whose purpose most people are not aware of whatsoever. It is an agenda based on creating and anchoring the frequency of fear, divide and conquer, chaos, confusion, 3D entrained survival thinking, apathy, ignorance, also via false light and new age teachings, disempowerment, disembodiment, and a lack of inner guidance which results from a desensitized, numbed down, head-centric lifestyle. All of these engineered events create the right frequency for triggering hive mind follower thinking patterns, the need for authority, Stockholm Syndrome, and the illusory search for external solutions, leaders, fulfillment, happiness via the disconnection of I from the self, from our bodies, and essentially, our inner guidance system, from nature and from the divine within. It is also the perfect frequency for generating the emotional energetic lush, via people's programmed and mechanical reactions to various stimuli, which is what the matrix overlords are really after. It's their food, their sustenance. We see this constantly looping pattern at play everywhere, but especially in the US at the moment, with many people still getting caught up in, and buying into, the political elections circus, regardless of who they cheer for, getting trapped in the lesser of two evils fallacy, as if their votes and protesting ever had, or will ever have, any effect on the bigger picture agenda. All of the emotionally charged projections against Clinton and Trump are simply the perfect food for the hyperdimensional matrix overlords, and so are the savior projections, Sanders, Stein, or whoever, who represent the controlled opposition to the prevailing narrative, all of them puppets, controlled by the same invisible hand. A quote by Sri Aurobindo, The Hidden Forces of Life, quote, looking at what happened in 1914, or for that matter at all that is, and has been happening in human history, the eye of the yogin sees not only the outward events and persons and causes, but the enormous forces which precipitate them into action. If the men who fought were instruments in the hands of rulers and financiers, these in turn were mere puppets in the clutch of those hidden or hyperdimensional forces. When one is habituated to see the things behind, one is no longer prone to be touched by the outward aspects, or to expect any remedy from political, institutional, or social changes. The only way out is through the descent of an embodied consciousness which is not the puppet of these forces, but is greater than they are. End quote. As was explored in depth with a previous article, the continuing belief in government and authority is the most basic setup of the matrix control system. The moment you identify with or support a party or candidate, left, right, middle, Democrat, Republican, Green, Progressive, Liberal, Conservative, whatever, and engage in the game, the matrix has you. We are far removed from any significant shift in consciousness so long as people continue to give their power away to any external leader, political and otherwise. And that's just the starting point in the process of emancipation. There is the intersecting illusion of identifying with a nation, flag, tribal legacy, and of course, all of the hive mind and groupthink fallacies which are based upon countless illusory identifications which arise from a lifetime of social and cultural conditioning and programming. All of these factors establish the framework wherein people basically fight each other and argue about how to better arrange the prison cell they are in, unaware of their current fate and reinforcing their shackles with their own consent. What a massive waste of creative energy. Although it's not technically going to waste, something sucks it up and feeds off of it, and that's the whole point of the matrix setup anyway. Humanity is not on top of the food chain, and consciousness is food as well. A quote by Barbara Marciniak, Bringers of the Dawn, quote, the ultimate tyranny in a society is not control by martial law. It is control by the psychological manipulation of consciousness, through which reality is defined so that those who exist within it do not even realize that they are in prison. They do not even realize that there is something outside of where they exist. You have been controlled like sheep in a pen by those who think they own you, from the government to the world management team to those in space. You have been deprived of knowledge by frequency control. End quote. But none of what's being discussed here is anything new. It's just unveiling itself now at an accelerating rate, which is the true meaning of the term apocalypse, the same shadows on the wall in different disguises, the same old game of control, divide and conquer, bad cop versus good cop manipulation, and dualistic polarization that has been going on for thousands of years, leading up to the times we are in now. All of these physically manifesting events, on a global and political level, are also designed to distract us from what is really happening on the other side of the reality veil, and keep occulted, hidden, from view the real architects of the matrix, beyond its 3D manifestation. It's the archetypal spiritual battle of darkness and light, a war for control of our minds and consciousness, a conflict that is working through us. We have to understand here that the true negative realm agenda is to eat consciousness. So, this actually prevents an overt takeover in literal, physical terms. If an invasion was detected, this would mean that the veil would be lifted and all would see the man behind the curtain and would be disgusted and turn away. Just as in The Wizard of Oz, those ruby slippers have to be obtained very carefully. Gathering the essence is an art of great subtlety. The negative alien plan is, in its purest sense, stalking. The aim of stalking is to create a completely controlled artificial environment composed of thoroughly predictable human behaviors made predictable because they have been programmed to respond to cues of conditioning. The important thing to remember is this: there is not a unified conspiratorial activity going on here in the hierarchy of government. The divide and conquer effect is also manifest at this level and suits the hyperdimensional alien purposes to a T. Such activity at all levels is consistent with their program of stalking, in which confusion and cross-purpose prevents a clear perception on the part of the stalkees. Yet, at some deep level there may be a direct conspiratorial interaction between the secret government and the negative aliens, but it is unlikely that any name of those involved would be recognized by anyone, no matter how in the know regarding the subject. These secret superiors are just that, secret. Any organization you can name, or about which you are aware, are merely outer circles. What is the designed objective of this stalking? It is twofold. First, the effect of stalking is sort of like stampeding a herd of cattle. Bit by bit, they are consolidated into a negative mode which consists of the idea of us versus them. Even though, on the surface, it may seem that this mode is positive or STO, i.e. save the world because it is wrong or flawed, or blighted with original sin or whatever, the very fact that it is formed in the dominator mode of perceiving salvation outside, means that it can more easily be taken over body, mind, and soul at a level that is unseen and unseeable. In other words, Satan can and most often does appear as an angel of light. It is only at the lower levels of the power structure that many still believe they are playing out the basic antagonism and self-protection roles. They believe that sending love and light to those in need is appropriate, without realizing that this activity is predicated upon a deep belief that there is something wrong, in error, in rebellion, and thus becomes again, us versus them. There is evidence that extensive implant technology may be used to ensure influenced obedience, and now, with new overt technology and AI, which the masses gladly embrace and accept without questioning, yet, a degree of freedom must be conserved through the consciousness due to the essential fact that the valued commodity is consciousness. A totally drugged, surgically altered, and thoroughly programmed psyche is only good for robotic slave service, and this may also be going on also, by the way. It is in this understanding that we find our way out of the trap. It isn't easy, but it is a way. The primary object of negative stalking is to persuade through strongly influenced, but not robotic, behavior patterns, the free choice of the targeted consciousness to align with negative higher density existence. Because, in the long run, the object is the eating of functioning units of consciousness by the negative hierarchy, with free will intact. It is not good food otherwise. Michael Topper, The Positive and Negative Realms of Higher Densities. Gurdjieff's tale of the evil magician illustrates, through metaphor, what Topper talks about with regards to negative stalking and creating a completely controlled artificial environment, composed of thoroughly predictable human behaviors, in order to persuade through strongly influenced, but not robotic, behavior patterns, the free choice of the targeted consciousness to align with negative higher density existence. A quote by G.I. Gurdjieff, quote, "There was an evil magician. He lived deep in the mountains and the forests, and he had thousands of sheep. But the problem was that the sheep were afraid of the magician because every day the sheep were seeing that one of them was being killed for his breakfast, another was being killed for his lunch. So they ran away from the magician's ranch, and it was a difficult job to find them in the vast forest. Being a magician, he used magic. He hypnotized all the sheep and suggested to them first of all that they were immortal and that no harm was being done to them when they were skinned, that, on the contrary, it would be very good for them and even pleasant. Secondly, he suggested that the magician was a good master who loved his flock so much that he was ready to do anything in the world for them, and in the third place, he suggested to them that if anything at all were going to happen to them, it was not going to happen just then, at any rate not that day, and therefore they had no need to think about it. He then told different sheep, to some, "You are a man, you need not be afraid. It is only the sheep who are going to be killed and eaten, not you. You are a man just like I am." Some other sheep were told, "You are a lion, only sheep are afraid. They escape, they are cowards. You are a lion, you would prefer to die than to run away. You don't belong to these sheep. So when they are killed it is not your problem. They are meant to be killed, but you are the most loved of my friends in this forest." In this way, he told every sheep different stories, and from the second day, the sheep stopped running away from the house. They still saw other sheep being killed, butchered, but it was not their concern. Somebody was a lion, somebody was a tiger, somebody was a man, somebody was a magician, and so forth. Nobody was a sheep except the one who was being killed. This way, without keeping servants, he managed thousands of sheep. They would go into the forest for their food, for their water, and they would come back home, believing always one thing: it is some sheep who is going to be killed, not you. You don't belong to the sheep. You are a lion, respected, honored, a friend of the great magician. The magician's problems were solved and the sheep never ran away again. End quote. The Matrix is currently being put into overdrive mode, and the controllers, the evil magician, actions are intensifying, in order to try to counteract the awakening that more and more people are experiencing, to a degree. The machinations of these predators are designed to lock in as many humans as possible into a time loop and frequency prison, before the window of opportunity closes during this time of transition, for there is indeed a way up and a way down. This transitional phase we're in right now is not an overnight event. It spans a whole age, yet we will see tremendous changes, breakdowns, and transformations within our lifetime, as we are already experiencing, and it will increase even more in the coming years. It's like we're in the midst of birth pangs that are ushering us towards a new level of being, a process that depends on our own inner work, our soul potential, and what we align ourselves with. These are challenging times to be alive, but exciting as well, and many of us came here to be part of the re-evolution as we start to remember our true identity. Any rebirth is painful and beautiful at the same time. A quote by Juliet Carter, quote, "When you investigate the endless conspiracies now being revealed, the deeper you go the closer you come to the core betrayal of humanity, the modified matrix that is causing the systemic failure of Earth's biosystems and is generating this fear-based reality, establishing a slave race on a prison planet. In order to enslave a race you take away its past, its memories, its ancestry, its identity, you downgrade its genetic blueprint, you instigate a program of psychosocial, chemical, electromagnetic, political and religious manipulation of consciousness that renders that race pathologically obedient. We are trapped in a corrupt matrix, generated by our own mutant genetic programs and the frequency feedback of our chemically altered brainwaves. Humanity's release from slavery will not only require that we retrieve the truth of our origins and uncover the identity of those who are manipulating our reality, but must also include the resurrection of the original human blueprint prior to our genetic modification. Encoded into that blueprint is the resonant template that will initiate our electromagnetic disassociation from the synthetic matrix. Resurrect the full divine immortal human blueprint, and you will realize the visual audible feedback of the true space-time continuum, a transcendent paradigm. End quote. It is important to point out that wishful thinking and a lack of creativity are the Achilles heel of the negative realm service to self-matrix consciousness. These flaws in their approach to manipulating humanity are reflected in the desperate acts being seen now across the world, which are becoming more and more apparent and predictable, the same patterns under different guises. Many of us who have done our research over the years, and worked through the conditioning and programming in our own awakening process, can connect the dots and see the unseen, identifying the invisible thread that weaves through all of these events, which seem to be unrelated on a surface level, but all point towards the same goal: global enslavement under the disguise of freedom, unity, and protection. From a hyperdimensional perspective, the end game or goal of their agenda is to completely take over or body snatch our physical, emotional, mental selves in order to lock us into a frequency prison. All of their various chessboard level triggers are designed to prime our bodies so as to facilitate the hosting of their vibrational essence within our human mainframe. Hence the push for disembodiment in all of its various guises, increasing the body-mind split via increased mental activity and distraction through technology and AI, as well as poisoning the individual through GMOs, EMF radiation, vaccinations, chemtrails, etc., all of which are environmental factors that collude with the original series of genetic modification experiments conducted by the predator from beyond the stars, in order to disconnect us more and more from our original DNA blueprint. This is a program of hybridization that is priming humanity's transmutation into shell vessels for hyperdimensional possession. While greater numbers of people are experiencing disillusionment, and concurrently beginning to question what they have been told and taught by official cultural gatekeepers, thus kick-starting their individual journey towards awakening, many others are being manipulated to align with the negative alien agenda. It's time to face the stark reality that there won't be a collective mass awakening, on a truly global scale, anytime soon. As I have mentioned before in politics, sovereignty, and embodiment, there are 7 billion people on this planet, all of whom embody vast differences in terms, and levels, of consciousness, and wildly dissimilar lessons to take on board, some even lacking full soul potential. For some, their purpose is to evolve towards the dark side of creation, a purely service to self path. For many others, their purpose is to evolve towards the creative principle of service to others' awareness. Key point: there is no judgment of what is better or worse, for both are expressions of the one, which can be seen as the equivalent of anarchism or voluntarism. From a spiritual perspective, a harmonic that cannot be forced, but instead has its own timing in the grand scheme of unified consciousness evolution. Shifting timelines, friction, and frequency vibration. What we are experiencing, and are currently in the midst of assimilating into our neurology, is a timeline reality or realm split. This is a natural consequence of the collective path humanity chose to take, for not everyone is here in this now to awaken. Many of us experience this splitting or cleaving of timelines within our own personal relationships, be it with friends, lovers, or even family. We also see it with regards to our lifestyle location, and where we call home. Some people simply don't resonate anymore with where they are currently living, particularly in dense populated areas, or with the job they've had for many years. As a result of that, it's easy to complain about others, your location, or a career that you don't resonate with anymore. However, the key issue here is frequency vibration. As you start to awaken, begin to seek out truths, and engage in sincere self-work, your being and frequency changes. This alteration initiates an inner conflict with regards to anything that is not of the same frequency. There is no use in getting upset at others or with your location or circumstances. That reactive behavior is actually quite counterproductive, and creates one of the many frequencies which the Matrix feeds off of. Remember, these otherworldly parasites want us to get triggered, be reactive, project outwardly, and fight each other. Where you live, and who you surrounded yourself with, was, at some point in time, a perfect match for where you were at. So we need to be mindful not to engage in shadow projection and blame the outside world for the changes we are going through, which are essentially arising from within. As you allow the changes to manifest themselves and stay focused on your own evolution, remaining sincere in your inner work, seeking truth, and learning to respond from a zero-point, non-reactive level of consciousness, you will also attract the right people and opportunities into your life that will help you to expand your awareness of what is, and what is possible. If you feel stuck, then this is a sign that there are still lessons to learn. Hint: there are always more lessons to learn, so get used to the occasional sensation of stuckness. Patience is key here. Avoid making decisions based out of desperation, fear, or head-centric analysis paralysis. It's about responding from a fully embodied knowing, following your intuition and inner guidance, instead of forceful or willful doing. As frequency anchors, and societal renegades, during this time of transition, we will gradually attract, and gravitate towards, people and places that reflect our embodied vibration, and vice versa. However, where we are supposed to be at any given place and time, and whom we are supposed to interact with, is not up to our conditioned ego mind and its desires to decide alone. We didn't incarnate on this planet for a vacation of avoidance, but rather, to actively participate in the shift that is underway. Our participation in this tipping point involves our frequency vibration, gifts, and talents, and the lessons we are here to learn for our own emancipation as we strive to aid others in their own process. This means that we will be put into areas, and in contact with people, where we are most needed, according to our individual purpose agendas, which are themselves birthed from a higher self perspective, not our ego's conditioned cravings. A quote by Tom Montauk, Realm Dynamics, quote, "The world is now experiencing a parting of ways between sectors of the population no longer resonating with each other. It is a realm split, a cleaving of collective fields into several smaller ones. Experiential catalysts are pushing people off the fence, forcing them to discover who they truly are and what they stand for. Their soul vibrations are purifying and intensifying, bringing a retreat from the superfluous and a return to destiny. What was once an emulsified mixture of diverse realms is separating into layers, and when the cup tilts it will be the lowest density layers that spill down the drain. The polarization phenomenon begins with mutual disinterest between individuals of uncommon paths. There may be confrontation and separation, or circumstance may simply bring a gentle parting of ways. But as time goes on and people gather into their most harmonious collective realms, the chasm between these realms will run so deep that eventually even the collective sharing of perception and experience will be severed. The learning requirements of each collective realm may become so mutually contradictory that they can no longer share the same space, the same timeline, the same density. This would entail a timeline split, each major realm following a different trajectory into the future that best accommodates the collective learning needs of its inhabitants. What tilts the cup remains to be seen. Of course, not all is predestined. There are chaotic factors left to free will. Some hyperdimensional forces aware of the impending shift are counting on mass frequency suppression to lock mankind into a probable future where these forces reap maximum energy harvest and retain control, whether in this density or the next. This may involve anything from mass loss of life to genetic assimilation and spiritual enslavement. A collective choice to elect such a scenario would acquiesce sufficient free will to give such forces free rein to rewrite history in order to expand and solidify control in the present and future. To an extent, this has already occurred, and the world as we know it today is the end result of the most recent timeline revision. And yet time marches on and the final future is still open. This brings us to what we as individuals can do. The wiser sources say we should simply be ourselves, remember who we are and radiate the essence of our soul. Indeed, we are frequency anchors. The vibration we hold determines the realm we establish, and our realm contributes to the collective realm. there are frequencies of suppression and frequencies of liberation. By exultantly living from your heart, you not only set an example for others, you also help lift the heaviness of the local and global collective realm. Nothing lifts gravity like levity and love. This assists those who would otherwise be subconsciously crushed by the prevailing low-frequency fields. It is commendable to take action and do something when called, but in the meantime simply hanging onto your center is enough. This sets you on the high path beyond the reach and sight of darker elements and clears the path for others to come with you. Keep your poise through the turbulence and cling tightly onto your mast when the sirens beckon you overboard. Shine as a lighthouse amidst the fog. End quote. The planet is also being infused with ever more dynamic energies as the dark and light polarities are increasing, creating more friction for those who are swimming in the current. The light brings up everything that is not in alignment with who you truly are. It burns away everything that is false, bringing the darkness into contact with conscious awareness, both within and without, in order to be transcended through the alchemical fire of transmutation. It's not a comfortable process at times, to say the least, but the only way out is through. A quote by Lisa Renee, Bifurcation of Time, quote, bifurcation means the splitting of a main body into two parts. In the mathematical study of change that occurs within a structure or space, bifurcation occurs when a parameter change causes the stability of an equilibrium, or fixed point in a field, to change. The comprehension of the mathematical change that is currently shifting the geometric value of frequency, which further generates a bifurcation in the structure of time and space, is very relevant to us now. This is directly related to the forthcoming split occurring between timelines which govern our continued consciousness, energy, expression on the earth plane as it is moving into future time. The bifurcation of time is forcing a direction which will accelerate volatile change in areas, as well as people, that are energetically stagnant or regressive. This change in the nature of timelines pushes humanity to make choices from the mental attitudes that have been formed from the worldview, perception and level of consciousness. Thus, the choice is made between the negative ego layers or the spiritualized higher self, based on which alternate is in control of the overall energetic body. The lower the quality of overall energy, the more unstable and disconnected the personal and environmental experience on Earth will become. The higher the quality of overall energy, the more stable and connected the personal and environmental experience on Earth will become. The planetary collective energy field has many layers of intersection links which are building more access points into diagonal lines moving throughout interdimensional fields. The accumulative effect of gradually increasing frequency and changing instruction sets in many of the transdimensional time and space fields has reached a point of divergence. The culmination of reaching this point of divergence within trans-time and space is forcing the shift of the overall planetary energy field parameters. That pressure of force being applied in the planetary energy field is resulting in accumulative intensity and extreme polarity amplification. When the extreme polarity of combined forces that exist together within a collective energy field reaches its apex, a split occurs. This is called the point of divergence within the fixed point in the field, in the range of possibilities, of which a bifurcation of time transpires. Time bifurcation. Conversely, those who are left unaware or refuse to take responsibility for negative ego behaviors and perpetuating the lower fundamental frequency will undergo extreme pressure to change. That pressure will amplify in all directions, 360 degrees, and feel volatile. So it is very important to pay attention, choose wisely and not allow oneself to be carried off aimlessly by the powerful world of forces into a destructive direction. The choice is with each individual. As more people undergo the bifurcation of time, this will start to gather and attract similar people with similar resonating frequencies to form into group consciousness or consensus realities. This attraction of gathering people will begin to form reality bubbles of shared belief systems that will be contained throughout the land mass and spread to different locations across the globe. As similar resonance attracts groups to form community and collaboration, these areas on the Earth of matched frequency will be increasingly synchronized. This phase begins a synchronization of frequency hubs across the globe, either of descending or ascending vibrational quality. This will continue to present some surreal challenges in the external world, as so many people are not aware of these shifting cosmic forces, and do not have ascension tools, clear mental or emotional state, or active higher sensory awareness. There is a great schism that is becoming visible in the representation of the external physical structure versus the internal energetic structure. More of us can clearly see, sense or feel the disconnection between the internal and external energies as chaos, or decay present in a person, place, or thing, that is radiating that lower frequency quality of energy. This time represents the true energetic reality behind the surface facade, making its contents known to us, simultaneously, as there is a stripping of the wheat from the chaff. End quote. With regards to this time of transition or bifurcation and its effect on the sovereign individual, there are various choices most people make, consciously or unconsciously, and to varying degrees. These choices can also overlap. You resist the planetary changes underway, and outwardly project your own internal discomfort onto others and your situations, shadow projection, getting caught up in the trap of blaming, complaining, reactive or mechanical behavior, and victim consciousness, all of which are responses that the matrix wants, and feeds off, while it drains your own life force and inner power. In order to resist the discomfort, you numb yourself with distractions and addictions, anything from drugs, sex, internet, games, and TV, to codependent relationships, shopping, work, food, parties, sports, gossip, etc., creating an artificial happiness and more masks so as to avoid feeling the internal friction and unpleasant emotions. This distraction program can also include a spiritual opiate, getting hooked on false light or new age teachings which result in spiritual bypassing and overestimating your level of embodiment and awareness, or you look for a quick fix, a shortcut and or magic pill, including psychedelics and medicine plants, which are all very common in today's fast food spirituality industry, and that can have detrimental effects on your inner development, making you dream that you are awake, but you, in fact, are still asleep. A quote by G.I. Gurdjieff, In Search of the Miraculous, quote, "This numbing and or fast-track approach often results in people getting caught up in head-centric living, male aspect of consciousness, trying to go too fast, cutting themselves off from their body and internal guidance systems, feminine aspect of consciousness, hence becoming more impressionable and suggestible to outside influences, thus losing the ability to discern between truth and lies, especially subliminal matrix mind. Control programming, as well as hyperdimensional interference. If being, level of embodiment, is not aligned with the pursuit of knowledge, there is no understanding, applied or embodied knowledge, not just intellectual information. The process of awakening cannot be rushed, and you don't get to move on until you learn your particular lessons, which are different for each of us. All of this is occurring from a soul perspective, which your mind or ego cannot perceive or understand, and, in fact, is afraid of, and actively resists. Knowledge is one thing, understanding is another thing. People often confuse these concepts and do not clearly grasp what is the difference between them. Knowledge by itself does not give understanding. Nor is understanding increased by an increase of knowledge alone. Understanding depends upon the relation of knowledge to being. Understanding is the resultant of knowledge and being. And knowledge and being must not diverge too far, otherwise understanding will prove to be far removed from either. At the same time, the relation of knowledge to being does not change with a mere growth of knowledge. It changes only when being grows simultaneously with knowledge. In other words, understanding grows only with the growth of being. In ordinary thinking, people do not distinguish understanding from knowledge. They think that greater understanding depends on greater knowledge. Therefore they accumulate knowledge, or that which they call knowledge, but they do not know how to accumulate understanding and do not bother about it. End quote. The other choice to make in light of conscious soul evolution and alignment with your higher self's purpose or divine will is as follows. A quote by R.E.D. quote, "You enter the fire of transmutation consciously, without resisting the resulting discomfort, via a sincere engagement with self-work and embodiment practices, seeking truth while letting everything that is in the way of reconnecting you to who you truly are, under the many masks of social and cultural programming and personality or ego identification, burn away, so as to open your heart to its connection with the divine, i.e., your unique purpose that's found on an embodied soul level. This work is about transforming your ego into a healthy vessel, not destroying it, as some distorted religions teach, for spirit to work through you, so that you are not influenced by external suggestions or internal conditioning which may result in you exhibiting mechanical or reactive behaviors. Non-resistance doesn't imply that you avoid standing up for yourself, or that you remove healthy boundaries and put up with abuse. It's about letting go of any resistance to the internal friction of evolution while still resisting the thought injections of the predator mind, those mechanical or reactive behaviors and concurrent influences, temptations, and programming or mind control implants, which represent attempts by the matrix to lock your thought waves into its frequency. Being able to establish healthy boundaries, and cultivating discernment with regards to who we surround ourselves with, is a key element of emancipation, alongside the ability to avoid falling into the trap of blind compassion. In my experience, everyone will say they want to discover the truth, right up until they realize that the truth will rob them of their deepest held ideas, beliefs, hopes, and dreams. The freedom of enlightenment means much more than the experience of love and peace. It means discovering a truth that will turn your view of self and life upside down. For one who is truly ready, this will be unimaginably liberating. But for one who is still clinging in any way, this will be extremely challenging indeed. How does one know if they are ready? One is ready when they are willing to be absolutely consumed, when they are willing to be fuel for a fire without end. End quote. Reality creation and divine will. The path towards awakening is about aligning your will with divine will, your connection to universal spirit with the I am presence within. In doing so, you will receive what you truly want and need, from a soul-based level, which are delivered via the lessons you need to learn as you diligently develop the gifts or talents you have that are unique to you. Most of these abilities you may not be fully aware of, yet. This is also how true reality creation works, in alignment with your soul's purpose. However, it's vital to note that this process will conflict with any desires and goals you have or had which stem from ego and personality identification, and social and cultural programming insertions. It also requires healing or letting go of any past hurts, grudges, resentments, shadow aspects, wounds, and traumas, which are being triggered or revealed even more so now in these days of accelerated energetic activity. In other words, you need to clear your vessel for higher energies to be able to anchor themselves in you, reconnecting you to who you truly are, activating your original blueprint or DNA. That process has profound effects on the outside world, which is not really outside or separated from you, with regards to a reality creation process that is based upon your internal healing journey, and resulting increase in embodied beingness frequency. This is very different from what is being promoted these days within the distorted New Age idea of reality creation or law of attraction, where the focus is usually restricted to a series of positive thought creeds, daily affirmations, and visualization techniques. To be clear, there is nothing wrong with any of that, focusing on positive thoughts, making affirmations, and engaging in visualizations. The problem is only if we do it forcefully, resulting in suppression of the shadow. Oftentimes, this fear of negative thoughts and emotions, or even of negativity that's taking place in the world around us, is because we feel that, by looking at it, we will conjure up that darkness in our own lives. The truth is, in fact, the exact opposite. Whatever you suppress and or ignore within yourself will, at some point, be mirrored back at you, and manifest itself in your life, waiting to be confronted and healed. This New Age approach regarding reality creation can also result in black magic, especially when people call in beings to help them, spirit guides, ascended masters, aliens, etc., thus creating a pact with the devil, so to speak, and involuntarily making contracts or traps of agreement with negative entities, posing as positive ones, who are more than happy to help you with your manifestation goals, only for you to realize later, or not, that you are being hijacked into a service to self-path. This situation arises even more frequently if you are trying to manifest desires which arise from the conditioned ego personality. A quote by Anies Springate, quote, "The ability to hold light is directly proportional to the courage to see darkness. Choosing to see just one creates distortions and illusions. It amazes me that something so simple and common sense can be so difficult to even discuss with spiritual people who insist on remaining positive. Actually, this avoidance is based on unacknowledged fear that their inner light might be somewhat dispersed by seeing darkness, and therefore, not giving the light much credit at all. I think there's also fear that they might somehow become tainted or the darkness might manifest in some form in their lives. But the opposite is true. It is the fear, especially unacknowledged, that has much more chance to manifest than darkness exposed to daylight and investigation. Just like we must be fearless about our own inner shadow, we must also be fearless about seeing this huge shadow of humanity. Or we will have the power to transform precisely nothing, within or without." End quote. A quote by Paul Levy, Dispelling Weedico, quote, "Spiritual or New Age practitioners who endlessly affirm the light while ignoring the shadow are one more example of yet another style of falling under the spell of Weedico. It's a beautiful thing to visualize and affirm the light, just not as an unconscious or fearful reaction against the darkness. Many metaphysical light workers are actually caricatures of genuine spiritual practitioners, as in their affirmations of the light are unwittingly avoiding conscious relationship with the darkness within themselves. Thinking that they don't want to feed the darkness by putting their attention on it, in their turning away from and avoiding their own darkness, they are unwittingly reinforcing the very evil from which they are fleeing. Looking away from darkness, thus keeping it unconscious, is what evil depends upon for its existence. If we unconsciously react, as compared to consciously respond to evil by turning a blind eye toward it, seeing no evil, we are investing the darkness with power over us." End quote. The more that you are in alignment with divine will, and have embodied your connection to spirit, the less you will have any need to engage in any form of manifestation techniques, because you are in the flow of divine creation, and positive synchronicity occurrences, which are in alignment with your individual and unique soul growth potential, will increase exponentially. This is a state of being where you don't fight the world, or find yourself at odds with it, because you realize, on an embodied level, that the inner and outer are not separate, and all there is in this life are lessons for your personal soul evolution. You disconnect from any forced, willful doing, and instead act from a grounded place of being, fully tuned into the present moment as you respond consciously to what life brings into your sphere of influence. Instead of making decisions from head-centric analysis, you become a conscious instrument, vessel for spirit, the divine to work through you. This is also based on a deep knowing and trust in both life and yourself, connected to your inner guidance which is grounded in your belly or pelvic floor. However, it's a long road to reach that level of fully awakened beingness, and the path itself is different for each of us, regardless of individual circumstances. This journey is not without obstacles and opposition as we continuously learn, and relearn, our lessons. A quote by Michael Topper, "Why you don't create your own reality," quote, "only in alignment and integral consonance with the whole value of being, may reality be accurately manifested through the medium of personal expression, for then there is no discrepancy between personal and universal, the perspectival part and the indeterminate whole." For understood in this way, it may be seen that unimaginable effectiveness results when the expression of one's personal will is not different than or removed from the spirit of divine will, i.e. the will to reveal spirit as the truth and authentic character of everyone's illimitable being. This means that, in terms of personal will, only the spirit of the teaching function remains. There is no will remaining in the repertoire of personal will except that which expresses perfect alignment, integration, and identity with divine will. This is the destiny of everyone. Contrary to unwarranted popular opinion, such initiated alignment with the will of absolute spirit being does not result in working one's will unopposed. On the contrary, the very presence of the awakened truth in the form of the spiritual adept has always generated immediate opposition. It has always awakened a corresponding reaction from the collective ego's self-protective slumber. This fact does not belie the whole being efficacy of that will which is so aligned with the totality. It simply means that such opposition itself, having become part of the manifesting pattern, incorporates as occasion of the teaching demonstration as well in whatever form expresses through the confrontation. Initiated alignment of will with the creative whole doesn't guarantee smooth personal circumstances. On the contrary, look at the story of every adept, examine the events surrounding the masters known to history. Rather, it ensures that such events will possess the character of an authentic teaching demonstration, to all who have the soul to see. It ensures the will of the whole is always done, regardless the partiality and prejudice by which that whole may be perceived in any given case. End quote. Everyone who starts on this path towards embodied awakening will be confronted with opposing, hidden, forces which are trying to keep him or her from staying on course. These distractions can come through your own mind, via self-defeating and disempowering thought injections, which we mistake as our own, thus resulting in mechanical or reactive behavior, or they can come through others, who act as unconscious portals whose words and deeds are designed to steer you off the path. But these interference episodes and internal or external obstacles are also tests from a higher perspective, put in place to teach you discernment, the value of one's own will, and to connect you with your warrior spirit. Many people don't pass through that first threshold of resistance and give up early in the process, or are tempted back into the matrix frequency via false light teachings and other traps and illusions. In relation to the hero's journey archetype, Joseph Campbell, this breakdown relates to the refusal of the call, as opposed to answering the call. A quote by Words of the Mother, collected works of Sri Aurobindo, quote, "There is always a spiritual test before being able to attain the next stage of power. Each time you have to make progress, you have to undergo an examination. When divine manifestations take place, they have also to pass through great difficulties and sufferings as a result of oppositions of dark and anti-divine forces which have had a hold upon earth since the creation. Those dark powers always oppose the new lights because they do not want to give up their grip on the earth, and sometimes their hostility even takes the form of war on earth, but in spite of all obstructions, the divine will succeeds at last. End quote. What embodiment truly means. In order to anchor ourselves to higher frequencies, and align with divine will, we need to consciously engage in the process of embodiment. To be embodied doesn't mean to simply be in touch with the physical body. Nor does physical exercise, working out, running, doing yoga, etc. automatically result in being embodied. If that would be the case, any athlete would be embodied. This is true within the physical sense of these techniques as well. Being flexible doesn't mean that one is a better yogi, or more spiritual, than others, for there is far more to yoga than the positional practice. You can be in touch with your physical body, and indeed, have mastery over it, without being embodied. In fact, many people engage in a lot of physical exercise to get in shape, oftentimes due to a socially conditioned body image program, which oftentimes results in emotional insecurities, but are not embodied in the true meaning of the word. Some people also tend to use physical workouts and exercise as a means to disassociate and build armor, muscles, in order to avoid feeling the world around them, like a buffer. It can also become an addiction, getting hooked on both the endorphins that are released during exercise and the compliments of others. However, it's not a black and white issue. Exercise is a good thing, if done consciously and holistically, beyond identification with the body. But the key point is to become sensitive and aware, and listen to or experience the world through the body. The root word of embodiment stems from embody, in reference to a soul or spirit invested with a physical form, and ment, the suffix forming nouns. Synonyms for embodiment are incarnation, avatar, manifestation. Avatar, a manifestation of a released soul in bodily form on earth. Incarnation, a person who embodies spirit in the flesh. Embodiment, from a spiritual or esoteric perspective, is the process of soul integration, connecting to one's higher self and becoming a conscious vessel for spirit to work through. It relates to the alchemical marriage of the inner male and female. Based on various esoteric teachings, the soul is something human beings need to develop or grow from a consciousness seed, see Gurdjieff, Castaneda, and to embody it via spiritual or esoteric work. In the average person in today's postmodern maze, the soul remains in an embryonic state and is thus not fully individualized. Until the soul has matured, one's identity lies in the mechanical false personality and is open to manipulation on all levels. An embodied soul, on the other hand, becomes the seat of the real self's creativity and dynamism, and the personality blossoms as an expression of one's higher, immortal, identity, connected to spirit and the divine within. A quote by Edmund Husserl, quote, "Embodiment, the lived body, is a lived center of experience, and both its movement capabilities and its distinctive register of sensations play a key role in his account of how we encounter other embodied agents in the shared space of a coherent and ever-explorable world." End quote. A quote by John G. Martin, quote, "In order for something to be embodied it must be perceived by the body, or related to something that the mind has understood through bodily experience." End quote. Embodiment, reconnecting with one's wholeness, fusing the separate aspects of the inner male and female energetic expressions, is, in my experience, the process of what is commonly called ascension or awakening. It is the philosopher's stone, the Holy Grail, the story of the hero going into the underworld, saving or marrying the princess or bride, his own feminine aspect of being, as depicted in many mythological traditions. It connects us with the wholeness of nature and the world, our inner guidance system and personal divinity, as well as our own individual purpose for being here, something the reasoning head or logical mind can never ever grasp. It reconnects us to our original blueprint prior to genetic manipulation, activating our dormant or decommissioned DNA. It's time to demystify this process and approach it in a practical and grounded way. We can read, study, and talk about it all from an intellectual perspective, but we can never get it until we get out of our heads and get into our bodies in a conscious way. We will never have any significant positive effect on the world as long as we approach the problems in the world from a disembodied, fragmented place, a place which most of us are not even aware of, because the head-body split has become so normalized within ourselves, and the society we live in. It is an unnatural divorce which is even more reinforced in this era, due to the rise of technology with all its attendant distractions. In our disembodied society, most people live in their heads, and thus find themselves disconnected from nature, their bodies, and their own wholeness, fragmented inside. They also approach the world, and their personal lives, in a fragmented analytical head-centric way, trying to fix the world, essentially projecting their own compartmentalization onto the world, which is a mirror of their own head-body split. Hence, most solutions to current issues, be it in the world or in our personal lives, perpetuate this disconnection, as we fight shadows on the wall and even create more problems with our head-isolated ideas, despite our well-meaning intentions. This also ties into the compulsory need to do and act. Whether it occurs in our daily lives, usually expressed through the need to identify with a political party or movement, the need to vote for someone who has the answers and can fix the system, which ties into the need for authority, which is a mirror of our own supervisor or authority in the head, telling us what we should or shouldn't do, or in the lives of activists who feel the need to fight the tyrants, or promote new social orders. It's all a reflection of a closed-loop self. Defeating hamster wheel that only works in favor of the hyperdimensional overlord's agenda, manipulating and playing us like pawns on a chessboard. Disconnected from our body and the feminine aspect of being, and by extension, our own intuitive guidance system, we are being tricked into looking outside of ourselves for direction, thus becoming followers rather than embodied sovereign individuals. As long as we are not embodied, as long as we remain disconnected from being our own wholeness, and our divine nature, our solutions and doing will always arise from the internal tyrant, which we project outwardly. This tyrant is the rampant male consciousness that is disconnected from the female within us all, regardless of gender, needs to be emphasized. It needs to have fixed answers, needs to control, tries to predict the future, caught in linear time and 3D thinking, and cannot surrender to, or even perceive, the mystery, wholeness, and perplexity of life and reality as it unfolds. This is not a denunciation of seeking answers, nor is it a call to embrace ignorance or just resort to becoming a passive couch potato. That would be black or white fallacious thinking, another product of the head-centric tyrant within, nor is it about denouncing the intellect, but rather it's about understanding its limitations, using it as a tool but not making it the master. This is about the sacred alchemical marriage of the male and female within, grounded in being, a place from which both answers and actions arise that are not a product of pure analytical thought, but are in fact aligned with divine will and our individual role and purpose. In this sacred marriage, doing and being become one, as there is no separation. Individuality, sovereignty, and being. Individuality in this context is the embodied individualized soul as a conscious transducer for higher energies, being the instrument for divine will. Individuality does not mean ego or personality identification, the false I, or what the matrix or official culture promotes as individuality, which is most often a cult of personality. In the same context, becoming a sovereign emancipated individual does not imply that one is an independent human being, separate from everything else. That illusory idea stems from the overriding head-centric male aspect of consciousness, the inner tyrant who is identified with self-achieved, false, independence. From a spiritual and holistic perspective, Being a sovereign embodied individual is based upon a deep recognition, on an embodied level, of the interrelationship of life, fully tuned into nature and the divine spirit as an individualized, but not separate, expression of it, a fractal aspect of the universal hologram. It stems from the feminine aspect of consciousness, which is grounded in being. A sovereign emancipated individual is not influenced by external influences and intrusions which the matrix attempts to inset into their consciousness, any form of rulers or authority, including hyperdimensional interference, or social and cultural programming and spiritual conditioning. But he or she is also not an isolated, independent and separate being, but deeply connected to, and in alignment with, nature, spirit, and the divine, as a conscious vessel and transducer for divine will. Being, in the true meaning of the word, does not mean that one is just passive, another common misconception. It is the still point, 0-point consciousness, from which our wholeness can be informed by the world's wholeness, listening to the world through the body, anchored in the pelvic floor or gut, the seat of the feminine aspect of consciousness, and then respond to it from this grounded space. It is from this state of being wherein spontaneous, perfect action arises, action that is in alignment with nature and divine will. It is receptive to what is, contrary to the reactionary tyrant of the male aspect of consciousness, who is threatened by the present moment, and, essentially, afraid of the feminine, addicted to willful doing and head-centric analysis, with a desperate need to control the outside world, which only results in more and more fragmentation, for the intellect/mind can never ever perceive wholeness. As Joseph Campbell said, the hero is the man of self-achieved submission. In his book New Self New World, Philip Shepard clarifies what Campbell meant by that observation. A quote by Philip Shepard, New Self New World, quote, Campbell is not talking about submission to a tyrant, or to injustice, or to rule, or to authority or any external idea. The hero's submission is self-achieved and transformative and offered with a complete peace of mind. He chooses to die to what has been, and he finds himself reborn into the newness of the living world around it. That is, he dies to society's description of being and, in opening himself to the vibrant unknown, submits to what is, which can never be fully described via the intellect or mind, and which cannot be accommodated without relinquishing the norms of language, perception, and sensibility, allowing them to change fundamentally. The ground of being within us is associated with the pelvic floor, the place where the brain in our gut rests. We should be cautious once more, though, not to be seduced by our culture's idea that the piece of the female element of being is passive, a word that makes it seem inert, phlegmatic, indifferent, or sluggish. That popular view reveals more about the self-affirming values of the known self, the head-centric male aspect of consciousness, than about being. The female aspect of consciousness is not passive, but receptive, the very quality against which our inner tyrant defends itself. And although its receptivity might seem dormant from the sensation-deprived perspective of the known self, it is anything but true. There is a sort of passivity to just receiving what is, but the nature of female receptivity carries us back to the roots of the word passive. It comes from the Latin passivus, capable of suffering, which traces back to the same Indo-European root as our words patient and compassion. You cannot receive all without suffering. The still peace within which the female being rests and burns and transforms is heroic, born out of self-achieved submission and sustained by a perfect receptivity that enables us to be present with what is, and with whatever is. Our culture is so obsessed with the values of male doing that we lose touch with the profound stillness of the present that underlies all things. By disconnecting from it, we deplete the present of the very foundation on which its wholeness rests. To diminish our sense of the present, of course, is to diminish our own ability to be present, it is only in the felt stillness of the present that the self can come fully to rest. And that rest is not just an idea, nor is it some ethereal, rarefied state. Perfect rest is recognized first and foremost by what is happening in the body. The grounded still point of your being is your truest ally, the integrating genius from which spontaneous, perfect action arises. First, being. When your body yields first to the stillness of the present, and then to its currents, you will find that the timelessness of the still point creates timelessness in all your activities, imparting them with felicity and ease. When the Zen archery master executes the perfect shot and acknowledges that not he, but it, made the shot, he is referring to the all-informing stillness of being out of which the shot arose. The way of the Tao is the way of supreme spontaneity. It is at once perfect activity, and perfect rest. Perfect activity is doing that is nourished by the perfect rest of being. End quote. To be in flow and tune with the Tao is to be in alignment with divine will. It is based on the alchemical marriage of the inner female and male, the embodied soul tuned into, and informed by, nature and the present moment via its sensory instrument of source consciousness, the body, grounded in the being out of which conscious doing arises. It relates to what Michael Topper stated, as quoted earlier: only in alignment and integral consonance with the whole value of being may reality be accurately manifested through the medium of personal expression, for then there is no discrepancy between personal and universal, the perspectival part and the indeterminate whole. A quote by Sri Aurobindo, quote, "The only free will in the world is the one divine will of which nature is the executrix, for she is the master and creator of all other wills." Human free will can be real in a sense, but, like all things that belong to the modes of nature, it is only relatively real. The mind rides on a swirl of natural forces, balances on a poise between several possibilities, inclines to one side or another, settles and has the sense of choosing, but it does not see, it is not even dimly aware of the force behind that which has determined its choice. It cannot see it, because that force is something total and to our eyes indeterminate. Behind this petty instrumental action of the human will, there is something vast and powerful and eternal that oversees the trend of the inclination and presses on the turn of the will. There is a total truth in nature greater than our individual choice. This apparently self-acting mechanism of nature conceals an immanent divine will that compels and guides it and shapes its purposes. But you cannot feel or know that will while you are shut up in your narrow cell of personality, blinded and chained to your viewpoint of the ego and its desires. For you can wholly respond to it only when you are impersonalized, embodied by knowledge, and widened to see all things in the self and in God, and the self and God in all things. The state of ignorance in which you believe that you are the doer of your acts persists so long as it is necessary for your development, but as soon as you are capable of passing into a higher condition, you begin to see that you are an instrument of the one consciousness. You take a step upward and you rise to a higher conscious level. End quote. Hidden forces and hyperdimensional interference. In light of the necessity of embodiment, alongside the anchoring to higher frequencies in order to align with our unique soul purpose, as a key for opening the door into consciously engaging with the evolution of collective consciousness, we can now see even clearer why the matrix control system is invested in keeping us disembodied and stuck in head-centric mechanical living. As long as you suffer from a lack of embodiment and thus live mostly in your head, as most people do, since our society is designed that way on purpose, keeping people in disembodied, brain-isolated living, you will suffer from a lack of holistic soul integration. This also relates to soul fragmentation, and will become a target vessel for something else to occupy that space. Most people are Trojan horses, carriers of entities which they are not aware of, non-physical beings which affect their thoughts, moods, emotions, and behaviors in unconscious ways while also feeding off of other humans around them, a topic which ties into psychic vampirism. Obviously, there are varying degrees of possession, and sometimes it's not that obvious, because most people don't question their own thoughts and desires. However, the majority of people are influenced by these hidden forces to one degree or another, as Sri Aurobindo pointed out. A quote by Sri Aurobindo, "The hidden forces of life," quote, "Men are being constantly invaded by the hostiles, and there are great numbers of men who are partly or entirely under their influence. At the present moment they are very active all over the earth. Of course, in the outside world there is no consciousness, such as is developed in yoga, by which they can either become aware of or consciously repel the attacks. The struggle in them between the psychic and the hostile force goes on mostly behind the veil, or so far as it is on the surface is not understood by the mind. The apparent freedom and self-assertion of our personal being, to which we are so profoundly attached, conceal a most pitiable subjection to 1,000 suggestions, impulsions, forces which we have made extraneous to your little person. Our ego, boasting of freedom, is at every moment the slave, toy, and puppet of countless beings, powers, forces, influences in universal nature. All life is the play of universal forces. The individual gives a personal form to these universal forces. But he can choose whether he shall respond or not to the action of a particular force. Only most people do not really choose, they indulge the play of the forces. Your illnesses, depressions, etc. are the repeated play of such forces. It is only when one can make oneself free of them that one can be the true person and have a true life, but one can be free only by living in the divine." End quote. A quote by Tom Montauk, quote, "Because hostile hyperdimensional forces have a vested interest in the matrix control system, they go to extraordinary lengths to suppress any destabilizing factors that could disrupt their food supply. Anyone who starts the process of waking up and regaining personal power and freedom is immediately targeted. The targeting aims to put him or her back to sleep, render him powerless, or make him lose faith in continuing his path. When a personal impulse toward freedom occurs, an equal and opposite impulse is set into motion, attracting to the target various negatively synchronistic opportunities to engage in vibe-lowering experiences to offset his impulse toward freedom. These include situations that aim to induce fear, distraction, suffering, doubt, depression, indulgence in lower impulses, and selfing behavior. Sometimes this phenomenon arises naturally from the law of inertia, occult and karmic laws, while other times there is intentional and active amplification of this counter-impulse by negative hyperdimensional forces to disarm the threat before he gains more power. Other methods of suppression include sabotaging and distracting a targeted individual via people around him who are open to direct manipulation. Anyone who fails to be fully conscious in the present moment can be a puppet for as long as his or her attention is elsewhere. Lapses of attention are enough for subconsciously implanted impulses to result in regrettable words or actions. Most people in this world place no priority on awareness or attentiveness, and instead live life in a semi-conscious dream state that makes them very prone to being pawns of the matrix control system. Some are born with insufficient levels of individualized consciousness to ever experience a lucid moment, and it is these who form the primary class of matrix agents, the rest of us functioning as agents only part of the time when we fail to watch ourselves. Due to the plethora of spiritually asleep people in the population, the matrix control system has no problem finding chess pieces to maneuver into place around a target." End quote. Based on many emails I'm currently receiving, and on feedback from people I work with, incidences of hyperdimensional interferences are also currently increasing at exponential rates. This is to be expected in light of what is happening from a larger picture perspective in this day and age, as mentioned earlier. There have also been a few interference events which people experienced after having contacted me in order to express a desire to join the time of transition retreat, from sudden discomfort, headaches, low energy, right before a scheduled call, resulting in cancellation of the Skype session, to technical problems, to anxiety issues, to disempowering dreams, to unusual doubts, making people unsure about themselves and thus making decisions difficult. All of these symptoms are normal, and can manifest in all areas of life. These are just the usual scare tactics to infuse the frequency of fear within any individual who is making a sincere effort to activate their own powers of embodiment. Anyone who has a basic understanding of what the path towards awakening entails, knows that we are all being tested individually, and the lessons are different for each of us. As Tom Montauk pointed out, above, anyone who starts the process of waking up and regaining personal power and freedom is immediately targeted. The targeting aims to put him or her back to sleep, render him powerless, or make him lose faith in continuing his path. It's important to stay vigilant, and not give in to any thoughts of fear, for fear is an illusion anyway. All there is are lessons to be absorbed, and we don't get to move on until we learn our personal lessons for the sake of our soul evolution, so that we can become the emancipated, beautiful sovereign beings whose existence reflects our original birthright. This hyperdimensional interference agenda is nothing to be afraid of. It's simply the reality of what is going on beyond the veil of the 3D world. On a basic level, just as we are subjected to physical parasites, germs, yeasts, and viruses which require our immune system to constantly fight off, we are also being subjected to hidden forces and non-physical intruders. Hence, it is about building up one's spiritual immune system, which ties into the process of embodiment and anchoring to a higher frequency in order to become untouchable by these hidden forces, so there is no frequency match. It's all about frequency and vibration with regard to the cause and the cure. A quote by Sri Aurobindo, Letters on Yoga, quote, "The first attempt of the possessing entity is to separate the person from his psychic soul, and it is that, which creates the struggle. All depends on the extent and persistence of the possession, how much of the being it occupies and whether it is constant or not. Hostile forces attack every sadhuk, some are conscious of it, others are not. Their object is either to influence the person or to use him or to spoil his sadhana or the work or any other motive of the kind. Their object is not to test, but their attack may be used by the guiding power as a test. It is one thing to see things and quite another to let them enter into you. One has to experience many things, to see and observe, to bring them into the field of the consciousness and know what they are. But there is no reason why you should allow them to enter into you and possess you. It is only the divine or what comes from the divine that can be admitted to enter you. To say that all light is good is as if you said that all water is good, or even that all clear or transparent water is good. It would not be true. One must see what is the nature of the light or where it comes from or what is in it, before one can say that it is the true light. False lights exist and misleading lusters, lower lights too that belong to the being's inferior reaches. One must therefore be on one's guard and distinguish. The true discrimination has to come by growth of the psychic feeling and a purified mind and experience. Evil forces can always attack in moments of unconsciousness or half-consciousness or through the subconsciousness or external physical, so long as all is not supramentally transformed. The hostile forces do not need a cause for attacking, they attack whenever and whoever they can. What one has to see is that nothing responds or admits them. The hostile forces have a certain self-chosen function. It is to test the condition of the individual, of the work, of the earth itself and their readiness for the spiritual descent and fulfillment. At every step of the journey, they are there attacking furiously, criticizing, suggesting, imposing despondency or inciting to revolt, raising unbelief, amassing difficulties. No doubt, they put a very exaggerated interpretation on the rights given them by their function, making mountains even out of what seems to us a molehill. A little trifling false step or mistake and they appear on the road and clap a whole Himalaya as a barrier across it. But this opposition has been permitted from of old not merely as a test or ordeal, but as a compulsion on us to seek a greater strength, a more perfect self-knowledge, an intenser purity and force of aspiration, a faith that nothing can crush, a more powerful descent of the divine grace. Whatever point the adverse forces choose for attack, however small it may seem to the external human mind, becomes a crucial point, and to yield it up may be to yield to them one of the keys of the fortress. Even if it is a small postern door, it is enough for them if they can enter. Nothing is really small and unimportant in the great path. Especially, when the struggle has come down to the physical level, these distinctions cease to have any value, for their small things have a not easily calculable index value and are of great importance. On that level, to lose a small post may be to make certain the loss of the big battle. All have had to pass through the ordeal and test through which you are passing. We would have avoided it for you if it had been possible, but since it has come we look to you to persist and conquer. Patience, quiet endurance, calm resolution to go through to the end and triumph, these are the qualities now required of you, the less spectacular but more substantial of the warrior virtues. Also, perspicacity and vigilance. Do not shut your eyes to the difficulty in you or turn away from it, but also let it not discourage you. Victory is certain if we persevere, and what price of difficulty and endeavor can be too great for such a conquest? These attacks very ordinarily become violent when the progress is becoming rapid and on the way to be definite, especially if they find they cannot carry out an effective aggression into the inner being, they try to shake by outside assaults. One must take it as a trial of strength, a call for gathering all one's capacities of calm and openness to the light and power, so as to make oneself an instrument for the victory of the divine over the undivine, of the light over the darkness in the world tangle. It is in this spirit that you must face these difficulties till the higher things are so confirmed in you that these forces can attack no longer. There are two things that make it impossible for them, the hostile forces, to succeed even temporarily in any attack on the mind or the vital. First, an entire love, devotion, and confidence that nothing can shake. Secondly, a calm and equality in the vital as well as in the mind, which has become the fundamental character of the inner nature. Suggestions then may still come, things go wrong outside, but the being remains invulnerable. Either of these two things is sufficient in itself, and in proportion as they grow, even the existence of the hostile forces becomes less and less of a phenomenon of the inner life, though they may still be there in the outer atmosphere. End quote. As I have mentioned in previous articles and talks, entities can only attach to, or interfere with, our daily lives where we have exposed blind spots, including savior mentality programs with regards to other people, lack of awareness, allowing oneself to be emotionally triggered, and holes in our energy body due to unattended wounding, unhealed trauma, drug abuse, including cannabis and psychedelics, and head-centric living, disembodiment. Hence, there is no use blaming entities for our own plight, because it can result in victim consciousness and disempowerment mind states, which is also what these entities target and feed off of. A quote by Lisa Renee, quote, "Painful spiritual fragmentation creates energetic splitting behaviors, which disconnects all components of the many layers that exist within the human being, separating aspects of their consciousness into different realms of time and space. An example is the agenda to split apart the inner female from the inner masculine consciousness to produce external sexual misery and misogyny. This internal split and fracture of the soul attracts negative spiritual entities that can form attachments. They take advantage of energetic weakness by manipulating that person's pain, in order to gain further access, to control some layer of their mind, body, or spirit. The negative entity feeds on the energy yielded from the source of pain that human being creates. This cycle of parasitism increases the spiritual wounding, which will produce subpersonalities. Most people are not aware they have subpersonalities, and yet this is extremely common on planet Earth. The subpersonalities are what are easily suggestible to forms of mind control programming, and will act out these behaviors when they are triggered to do so. Negative entities, both human and non-human, intentionally create more pain and trauma in a person they perceive as weaker, to get them to commit actions that will place that person's mind and soul in bondage and servitude to their agenda. Victim-victimizer programming is reinforced throughout society to incite thoughts of disconnection and powerlessness. Negative entities act as the imposter, imposing on people's minds. They falsely project negative behaviors, images, and actions, in order to get the person to believe that the harmful option is the only way out of their pain, trauma, and anxiety. Or believe that the false projection is the escape path that will bring them bliss and happiness. The reality is that when the person commits the self-destructive action, it amplifies and accumulates painful energies, which makes the sensation of inner pain or addiction much worse. In cases of astral bliss, the person lives in a delusional state in order to avoid any discomfort or pain that would be caused, if they were to really see the truth of what happened. Anytime we reject the truth to remain comfortable within our beliefs, or from our fears of self-annihilation, we easily accept lies. When a person believes the negative thoughts they received from a negative entity, are actually coming from their own mind, and they act out that destructive behavior, the entity is successful in deceiving them. This manifests as splitting, with astral cords or satanic bindings. Generally, entities use an emotional bait hook based on manipulating the type of pain or trauma that person carries. The dark force will bind itself to the wounds of that person, through the consent that was made during the destructive behaviors that person has acted out in the past or present. When people allow negative and unloving people access to their genitals, sexual bindings and entities can also be passed through intercourse. Now that person is being drained and manipulated by a dark attachment that has corded itself to some part of that human's body. The truth is difficult, but it is what sets us free, along with nurturing our direct relationship with the power of God's eternal loving spirit. All forms of denying the existence of the spiritual dimensions, ultimately generates deceptive harm in our life. We cannot reject the very nature of what and who we are as spiritual beings, and must recognize that we are sharing this earth with many other kinds of spiritual forces. We have a physical body and mind, but they are interconnected and intricately enmeshed with our soul and spirit. Thus, we need to integrate all of our bodies to help bring them back into balance, to be able to heal the true heart of humanity. End quote. Having worked with many people who are dealing with entity interference issues and attachments and traps of agreement, I see a common misunderstanding with regard to the nature of these entities and how they operate, giving them too much power, or even getting into paranoia, which leads to the creation of thought-form entities. It's a viscous, self-inflicted, self-perpetuating cycle. It is also about developing extrasensory perception, yogic consciousness as Sri Aurobindo talked about, which is part of the awakening and embodiment process. This involves being able to perceive these forces and intrusions directly, and being able to separate external suggestions from our own internal guidance. This doesn't necessarily have to be clairvoyance, where you visually see them, but rather, harnessing your body's innate systems of sixth sense cognition so that you are sensitive enough to sense or perceive them beyond the five senses, identifying the unseen. The mind or intellect, and our limited five-sense ordinary consciousness, will never be able to perceive these forces and will, in fact, often deny their existence. Anyone looking for proof, from a five-sensory scientific perspective, will never find it. It all depends on the level of being or embodiment, as well as bodily sensitivity, and awakened inner consciousness of the individual, a measurement which goes way beyond intellectual intelligence and IQ. Our difficulty in discovering the forces of life is due to the nature of the normal or ordinary consciousness of the human being at the present point of his evolution. For the ordinary consciousness, which is mental, can apprehend things only through the sensorium, that is, the sensory and intellectual apparatus. Consequently, our knowledge of forces is indirect and limited to what the senses can perceive of the outward effects of forces and the intellectual inferences that can be drawn from such sensory perceptions. As Sri Aurobindo explains, the ordinary consciousness is that in which one knows things only or mainly by the intellect, the external mind, and the senses, and knows forces etc. only by their outward manifestations and results, and the rest by inferences from these data. There may be some play of mental intuition, deeper psychic seeing or impulsions, spiritual intimations, etc., but in the ordinary consciousness, these are incidental only and do not modify its fundamental character. It is when the consciousness develops and becomes more subtle that it comes into a more direct contact with the inner reality of things and gains an awareness of forces. In Sri Aurobindo's words, from the hidden forces of life, selections from the works of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, quote, the ordinary man lives in his own personal consciousness, knowing things through his mind and senses as they are touched by a world which is outside him, outside his consciousness. When the consciousness subtilizes, it begins to come into contact with things in a much more direct way, not only with their forms and outer impacts, but with what is inside them, but still the range may be small. But the consciousness can also widen and begin to be first in direct contact with a universe of a range of things in the world, then to contain them as it were, as it is said to see the world in oneself, and to be in a way identified with it. To see all things in the self and the self in all things, to be aware of one being everywhere, aware directly of the different planes, their forces, their beings, that is universalization. It, consciousness, begins to know inwardly and directly and not merely by external observation, and contact the forces at play in the world, feels their movement, distinguishes their functioning, and can operate immediately upon them as the scientist operates upon physical forces. There are diverse forces which act on us, determining the course of events, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and actions, affecting our moods, health, and level of energy, pulling the human being to nether depths or beckoning him towards lofty heights. There are also the hidden forces behind evolution and beneficent forces which man can learn more and more to draw upon. The powerful sway of life's hidden forces shows that man's sense of possessing a free and independent will is highly illusory as long as one lives in the ordinary consciousness. All this, our reason cannot grasp, because it is the instrument of an ignorance with a very limited vision and a small stock of accumulated and not always very certain or reliable knowledge, and because too, it has no means of direct awareness, for this is the difference between intuition and intellect, that intuition is born of a direct awareness while intellect is an indirect action of a knowledge which constructs itself with difficulty out of the unknown from signs and indications and gathered data. End quote. One of the assumptions I hear most people make, is that someone else just needs to remove their entity attachment or etheric implant and then all is fine and good. That is not the case. Removing an entity is not enough, for it or they will come back tenfold, via attachment or interference, if the entry point is not healed and closed. A metaphor might be when you get surgery and remove a tumor, post-operation, you still have to take care of the wound, and obviously work with a surgeon who knows what he or she is doing, i.e. be discerning about the many sketchy healers out there, so it doesn't result in infection. You also have to look at lifestyle changes so that the tumor or cancer doesn't grow back. It's a holistic approach on an energetic level, and much depends on the client taking responsibility for the healing process, and not falling into victim consciousness or blaming entities, which I tend to see a lot of in people I discuss these topics with. At the end of the day, it's about you stepping into your own embodied warrior power and sovereign self, and firmly and steadily ejecting and rejecting the entity interference yourself. That is more powerful than someone else doing it for you. A good healer is a facilitator who can hold space and provide guidance but doesn't do the work for you. In fact, any healer who tells you he or she can heal you without you doing anything, and promises all kinds of magical healing, is a big red flag and should be avoided. Lots of charlatans out there who cash in on that, and who often work, consciously or not, in partnership with entities. This relates to what I wrote in Reflections from the Peruvian Jungle, Shadow Work, and Healing. And that is the key and most important part of healing work. A healer doesn't heal you. A healer is someone who triggers within you, your own ability to heal yourself. Your own body knows what to do and it is always striving towards wholeness and healing, on all levels, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, if given the space to do so. You have the power all within yourself and you are your own healer, even though we all need assistance sometimes. Asking for help can be very challenging for some people, to have the space and safety to let it happen. In this day and age, with the rise of the internet and instant information access, we have more available outlets for feeding our curiosity than at any time in recorded history. On the positive side, it helps us to sidestep the corrupted mainstream media and mainstream education system, in order to help us learn about alternative views and knowledge that has previously been suppressed, filtered, and distorted. It also helps us to connect and network with people from around the world who have similar interests and questions. On the other hand, this unlimited access of information has also opened the floodgates for a lot of rubbish and disinformation, making it harder and harder to discern truth from lies. Some of it is intentionally distributed so as to mislead people, and some of it occurs because of a lack of discernment within those individuals whom are reposting or sharing it. Besides the obvious surveillance issues, the internet is also a great tool for the powers that be to vector people away from truth via COINTELPRO, counterintelligence programs, psychological operations, fake whistleblowers, and alternative media-based, popular, charismatic, speakers and researchers who have been co-opted, usually without their awareness, and whose activities actually feed into the matrix while seemingly exposing it, especially if they are not engaged in sincere self-work and embodiment processes, and are not aware of how hidden forces can influence them, i.e. lack of understanding of the hyperdimensional matrix beyond its 3D manifestation. Keep in mind that good disinformation is truth mixed with lies, most often a high percentage of truth and just a small percentage of lies, but enough falsity to undermine the truth, vector the seeker away from uncovering more truth, and make him or her take a detour down the rabbit hole and get lost in the labyrinth, while believing themselves to be on the right track. Disinformation can be spread intentionally via the aforementioned COINTELPRO and also through controlled opposition channels that are populated by conscious agents posing as gurus, whistleblowers, and charismatic truth-tellers, or it can happen unconsciously, by well-meaning individuals who are not discerning, lack sincere self-work, and are hence easily manipulated, especially when they come from a savior or victim complex and their ego is involved. Their self-importance gets activated, and they feed off of the attention they are getting. Just as we obviously need to question the mainstream media, we also need to be very discerning about the information presented in the alternative media landscape, and the cult of personalities who populate that arena. As I wrote in Individuality, Embodiment, and the Anchoring of a Higher Frequency. Many people have the need to follow some figurehead, be it a government personality, medical professional or spiritual guru. Individuals oftentimes get sucked into the celebrity matrix and latch onto authors and researchers they admire as well, blindly following what they say without doing their own fact-checking or listening to their bodily intuition. There is a big difference between getting inspired by people who put out work that resonates with us, and from whom we can learn new points of view, and putting those same folks on a pedestal, living only by the content of what they publish without questioning it at all, and projecting absolute authority onto them, whether it's done consciously or not. The latter situation is how we wind up getting cut off from our own inner knowing, intuition, guidance system, the network which holds our personal truth that is unique to us, and which lights up our individual path and illuminates our life lessons. When we abdicate personal accountability to sovereign thought and deed, it puts us into a tunnel vision situation which actually disconnects us from our divine nature and innate wisdom. Nowadays, the internet is saturated with tons of information, mostly in oversimplified sound bites, where most often people don't read more than a headline or quote or excerpt from an article. They also have a hard time watching videos that are longer than 5 minutes. This is the epidemic of the short attention span, brought on as a result of the information overload and technological oversaturation of society, because our attention is constantly being vectored away from the truth, and we are being distracted with overstimulation right at the tip of pressing a button on the screen. We are less and less able to focus, remain discerning, and stay present. It keeps us in a head-centric state on non-being, cut off from our bodies. A quote by Mark Manson, "In the future, our attention will be sold." Quote, "The problem is that the attention economy makes it economical to spread one's attention across 8 different interests and 23 different friends each day. And because we're all spreading our attention so thin, many of us are losing the all-important life skill of focus. As the short attention span epidemic is increasing exponentially. Focus is what generates long-term success. Focus leads to deeper and more meaningful relationships. Focus determines how well we can improve at something. Yet our current economy is constantly providing incentive away from focus and towards, whoa, did you see that video of the guy on the motorcycle who landed on the car? That was crazy. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, focus. The New Age presents problems of attention, not of happiness or narcissism or loneliness. The problem is not the technology itself, it's how we choose to use the technology. Is it serving us or are we serving it? These are the new challenges new generations must face. We must learn to master our focus and our self-awareness to properly take advantage of the attention economy. Limitless access to knowledge brings limitless opportunity. But only to those who learn to manage the new currency, their attention. In the new economy, the most valuable asset you can accumulate may not be money, may not be wealth, may not even be knowledge, but rather, the ability to control your own attention, and to focus. Because until you are able to limit your attention, until you are able to turn away, at will, from all of the shiny things and nipple slips, until you are able to consciously choose what has value to you and what does not, you and I and everyone else will continue to be served up garbage indefinitely. And it will not get better, it will get worse. End quote. Truth seekers can also waste a lot of time and energy going down the rabbit hole, getting hooked or addicted to external information and sensationalism that has very little to do with truth seeking. In their attempt to figure things out, they can get lost in the theory abyss, especially if there is a personal lack of discernment, and being has not caught up with knowledge. Gathering intellectual information alone does not help you, nor the world, in the long run, and most often results in self-delusion, because understanding and wisdom, embodied knowledge, is lacking, as discussed in the triad of knowledge, being, understanding earlier. Another trap is to focus on just one topic or area alone, for this can create a tunnel vision of inflexibility, or even dogma, if one is very attached to a certain view. This observation isn't intended to invalidate the many amazing renegades who have done tremendous work in their particular field of expertise, many of whom I have learned from myself. I am simply pointing out the importance of a holistic approach that addresses body, mind, and spirit, which is more and more needed in this day and age. To be clear, anyone who wants to awaken and seek truth needs to step into the unknown and go down the rabbit hole, to read, study, learn, unlearn, to the best of their abilities, and question everything they have been told and taught by official culture. This process is also different for each of us, depending on our personal lessons and talents. Hence, it's not about all of us becoming scholars and study or researching everything there is to read or view, which would be ridiculous and impossible anyway. However, if the process of intellectually gathering information in the pursuit of truth is not matched with the necessary inner work, the mind will trick you, and you will get lost in the rabbit hole, as I've seen with many well-meaning truth seekers and researchers. I got stuck in this minefield at some point myself. I don't take myself out of the equation because I learned the hard way. It happens when we lose focus of the principal aim, emancipation, and get distracted by curious fascination. This is not meant to denounce curiosity, but curiosity alone is not enough. Knowledge acquired through study in the pursuit of truth is an essential, but only temporary, stage of awakening. It helps us to decondition ourselves from social, cultural, and educational programming, pushing through our own cognitive dissonance, while we learn about critical thinking, logic, and how to use the mind properly as a tool. However, gnosis, higher knowledge, cannot be perceived by the mind alone, nor can it be intellectually understood. In order to receive and anchor gnosis, the vessel needs to be built via esoteric self-work and embodiment. In other words, our level of being determines how much higher knowledge we can access via direct experience, tuning into nature, the universe, and the present moment in our daily lives, where we are constantly being informed by spirit and the vast living library of interconnectedness. This knowledge is impossible to put into the limiting constructs of language. You cannot access gnosis via reading alone, for it resides beyond our five sensory perception. This is also the gateway towards receiving and experiencing higher love of the divine, which is beyond the love we experience, or think or feel it is, in the lower separate consciousness state of ego or personality identification. We should be mindful not to forget the most important part of seeking truth and its purpose, to assist us in our personal embodiment or self-work and collective ascension process, so as to align with divine will, via anchoring to higher frequencies, in order to transcend the matrix, and not get caught in shadow dance or projection, or willfully trying to fight it. As embodied frequency anchors, we have far more positive effects to offer to others, and the collective, than just sharing information and trying to wake up others via intellectual discourse alone. Again, it's all about frequency and vibration. A quote by Nikola Tesla, quote, "If you wish to understand the universe, think of energy, frequency, and vibration." End quote. The process of awakening is not just about gathering information and becoming a walking encyclopedia of how the world is controlled. Of course, having a solid understanding of the matrix control system, in particular the hyperdimensional matrix, and how it operates is a key aspect of the journey, know thy enemy, but when we get caught up in trying to figure everything out intellectually, we'll hit a wall, especially since we are subjected to manipulation that is outside of our five sensory perception. It is about making the darkness conscious, not dwelling on it to the point that we only see darkness in the world, thus getting stuck there. This can also result in seeing evil and conspiracies where there are none, as a result of shadow projection and paranoia, and this will keep you trapped in the lower frequencies, which is where the matrix control systems wants your consciousness to reside. You can only transcend it, you cannot transform it. After all the rabbit holing you do, if you don't get stuck and lost, you will ultimately face a mirror, looking straight at yourself, and that is where the real work begins, with yourself. A quote by Zen Gardner, Information Fixation, and the True Breakaway Civilization, quote, "It's been quite a concern for me for some time now, watching the growing information fascination phenomenon metastasize. It's become contagious and extremely toxic for those who should have transcended this energetic level some time ago. If we are aware of the fact that we are co-creators of our reality, why are we fixated on this dark, false imposed one and its projection instead of what we know to be true and pure and empowering? Why do we dwell on these dark temporal and clearly manipulative realities? Once we know they're negatively charged and spiritually poisonous and clearly coming from the wrong source, why do we keep drinking at their well? Is the next purely logical step so hard to take? To break free of it and assert what we know to be the true alternative world? Or is something even more close to home afoot, having to do with our own personal issues? For some reason we wrap our identity around what we participate in. Even though we have clearly found out that we each are the captain of our own sovereign ship, we still keep running around their decks and want to know every intricate detail of how their damned matrix tanker operates. Where's the cut-off point? When is enough enough? Never, but only if we're operating in their system. That's what it's designed to be, a vortex. Entertain it and you become it. New and fanciful ways, but part of it we are when we do this, when we're caught in the fascination loop, for whatever personal or outside stimulated reason. This is where other forces are in full play, so our seeming reasons for being there are even convoluted within their false paradigm. Staying on top of what's going on becomes a 24/7 addiction and it sucks, literally, sucking the very life out of you. But ironically you feel very connected, and on top of what's going on in the world. Your personal life might go to hell, but you feel essential to the process, and thereby very connected and self-affirmed. It's a drug. A vibrational source of fascinating deception. So much is at play, but yesterday's truth can become today's bullshit with just a spiritual nuance, a wrong source, or twisted application. That or just the overwhelming quantity of fundamentally negative crap can sink our once sailing ships, if we're not careful. Reactive living is a bitch. If we just react to everything that crosses our path or our screen, we are not living very responsibly nor consciously. Time for meditation, being in nature, relaxing with friends, and doing personal energy work, are imperative. More now than ever. There's always a lot of letting go involved in real change. Old habits, viewpoints, understandings, attachments, social contracts, and on they go. End quote. Regardless of how much information you take in, and how much effort you make to stay on top, in the end it is about applying knowledge within your own life and relationships, taking full responsibility for your choices, engaging in self-work, confronting your own shadow, working on becoming embodied, and staying emotionally intelligent, not just smart, about how the matrix operates, with its endless conspiracies and manipulations that are also designed to keep us distracted from the real work. It is also important to learn how to do self-work, which includes a basic understanding of psychology, the body-mind connection, and esoteric or spiritual self-work principles, among other tools and teachings, that will help you to reconnect with who you truly are. Of course, discernment is key as always, for there are many false and distorted false light, New Age, pseudo-spiritual teachings out there. The truth or alternative movement, while helping to bring awareness about important topics to many people, has also partly become an entertainment circus, with more and more conspiracy, UFO, and truth conferences popping up which attract large audiences in search of knowledge and answers, including individuals who are just fascinated and addicted to information. While obviously not everyone who speaks at these events is co-opted, it is important to be discerning with regard to their agendas, and not simply remain fascinated by the information that is being presented from an intellectual perspective. Tune into the energy and being of any given speaker or researcher, and allow that feedback to guide your information filtering as well. It's not a black and white issue, of course, and alternative conferences or gatherings are also great opportunities for networking and meeting people in person, something that is increasingly rare in our screen-addicted world. From individuality, embodiment, and the anchoring of a higher frequency. Many people have cunning intellects and are well versed in articulating their thoughts when it comes to topics of the external world, but when it comes to accessing their deeper feelings and expressing themselves through their emotional IQ, things can be very challenging for them. They are cut off from their emotional selves, and have a hard time tuning into their bodies, stuck in the male aspect of consciousness. They are not embodied in any real sense of the term, and tend to rationalize away anything that may come up within their psyche and or shadow, and project it outwardly onto others and the world at large. Alternatively, they may understand, on an intellectual level, what the issue is, but they can't allow themselves to feel through it and let arise what needs to come up on a deeper emotional level, due to their being so out of touch with their vulnerability. Oftentimes, the intellectual pursuit of information alone can also become a buffer and unconscious distraction or addiction so as to avoid doing the necessary inner work. This is especially apparent when shadow projection is at work between individual egos, and we scream and shout, literally or figuratively, at the world for how screwed up it is, projecting hate, anger, and disgust, perfect food for the hyperdimensional critters, or suggesting that we need to revolt violently or even kill all the psychopaths, who are just empty shells that are hosted or possessed by negative entities. Killing the host in order to bring down the cabal, Illuminati, New World Order, as I've seen many activists proclaim, and save humanity and the world won't actually change anything within the grand scheme of the Matrix control system, but will only result in supplying the hyperdimensional overlords with the negative food frequency they want. The trap of fighting evil. This whole notion of fighting evil and trying to save the world is based on a misconception of what evil actually is, and how it operates within the duality of light and dark. No one is better or worse than others, all are unique, and are essentially a fractal expression of the divine God source consciousness or whatever you may want to call that unified wholeness of totality. Each being has their own talents, lessons, and karma. There is nothing here that shouldn't be here. Even psychopaths and the hyperdimensional overlords have their roles to play in this cosmic drama, or farce, depending on your point of view, creating the necessary contrasting friction for the evolution of consciousness. It's not about denying evil either, but understanding its role in the bigger picture. Part of our work is to be discerning, and to make the darkness conscious, both within and without, not living in a bubble, nor using generalized higher truths like we are all one or all is illusion as an excuse for inaction. However, there is nothing wrong with reality. Everything and everyone has its place in this game of consciousness evolution and expression of God's self. The frequency of evil, sometimes referred to as the Weedico virus and expressed in socio-cultural terms as ponerology, and psychopaths have their place and their own purpose in the trajectory of our conscious evolutionary arc. It has its own free will right to exist as part of creation. It just comes down to finding our own unique setting within it all, to be discerning and choose consciously, and to understand what it really is that we are aligning ourselves with, since we are all transducers of higher energies. Good versus evil. The overarching reality is that humanity is never going to succeed in completely eradicating or removing evil from our worldly consciousness, nor will everyone be capable of experiencing rehabilitation, either. But while we acknowledge these facts, there may be a different way of going about seeking to mitigate the impact of evil in our societies, and the key in this endeavor involves understanding frequency and vibration and how this relates to reality in order to transcend the mutant matrix. There are predators and psychopaths who are predators by choice. They have their own purpose in this incarnation, and cannot be changed. Hence, understanding evil and darkness in humanity's cosmic play, with all the discernment this requires, is a crucial component, as opposed to denying it, running from it, trying to get rid of it or attempting to fight it on a purely 3D level. If we believe that evil can and should be eradicated, or that we need to save the world by fighting it on a purely 3D level, or even deny the possibility of evil and believe it doesn't exist, then we will remain not only ignorant with regards to the whole purpose of this miracle called life on Earth and the evolution of consciousness, but are also manipulated to align with the negative realm agenda. A quote by Michael Topper, "The positive and negative realms of higher densities," quote, "In the higher densities, the name of the game is consciousness." This simply means that the higher densities of existence, whether positive or negative in orientation, all recognize that the business of all being and existence everywhere is always that of consciousness, becoming more and more aware. Awareness is related to density of consciousness, so to say. The service to self way of achieving density of consciousness is to gain weight by assimilation of other consciousness units. This is generally promoted as all is one and refers to evil as a rebellion, or a fault, or something that will ultimately be done away with. Service to others, on the other hand, sees gaining weight in a different way. It sees that an acknowledgement of the consciousness of other self as equal to its own consciousness, in spite of completely different manifestation of that being, is the way to network the consciousness, so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The difference is that the service to others guys recognize consciousness as being an integrative activity of mutual networking and interdependence, because they view all others as self, even if they are different, and therefore seek to help and assist because the other is self in an absolute internal sense. In this way, absolute consciousness, or God, is glorified by a marvelous diversity of being, if you wish to put it in those terms. The negative guys, on the other hand, play the game in terms of domination, subjugation, and absorption of other consciousnesses into one. But, they too, understand that the rules of the game posit that in order for them to truly absorb into their being these other consciousnesses, that the other must choose to become part of their self-aggrandizement. An unwilling food is, in essence, not nutritious, so to say. If the consciousness does not choose, it becomes a poison to the consciousness that seeks to eat it. And so they must promote oneness in a very particular way. An important point here is, this negative service to self-consciousness arises from the self-viewing self at the instant of creation and is, therefore, an integral part of creation. It cannot be separated from it because it exists only because of positive creative inception. Neither can exist without the other. It's that simple. And, because this state of consciousness occurs in conjunction with, and precisely because of, creative potential, or otherness, and is, in fact, identified through that factor, it cannot be done away with without all returning to the one and just going back to sleep. Thus we see that the efforts to save the world via punishment of the wicked, or conversion to the light, or spiritualizing matter with love, are all expressions of the fundamental desire to undo creation, to kill God. Through the idea that evil and darkness is a rebellion, a fault, a thing to be done away with, the twist is introduced that lays the groundwork for domination and absorption. So, the bottom line is, this other half of the all, born along with the creative upsurge, becomes focused on actualizing its own impulse to undo creation, for it realizes that only then can it be at peace. The only way it can achieve that ideal narcissistic withdrawal into itself in infinite self-contemplation is through reclaiming all attention and consciousness that is, in effect, borrowed against the inconceivable magnitude of consciousness in cosmic sleep. Darkness becomes, in effect, an incurable insomniac. The consciousness of service to self-darkness feels that it must tear apart the creative fabric of existence, thereby liberating those units of energy involved in the creative functions, and swallow them back into itself, erasing their differential properties and powers so as to restore the one as one itself. However, this is not clearly seen at the lower densities until the masks are stripped away. The deepest implications of this are hidden by many veils. It is only at the lower levels of the power structure that many still believe they are playing out the basic antagonism and self-protection roles. They believe that sending love and light to those in need is appropriate, without realizing that this activity is predicated upon a deep belief that there is something wrong, in error, in rebellion, and thus becomes again, us versus them. And even the fourth and fifth density participants do not necessarily comprehend this ultimate dissolution. Sort of the ultimate light eater preaching the gospel of devolution as salvation. End quote. The future is not set in stone. As the planetary energies increase more and more, people are becoming fearfully uncertain about the future. With various alternative media figureheads making all kinds of predictions, from economic collapse, imminent World War III, nuclear warfare, cataclysms, comet bombardments, martial law, and depopulation, to a mass awakening, defeat of the cabal, first contact, UFO disclosure, uniting with our space brothers, free energy, etc., and various other scenarios that are supposedly happening soon, some of them even on a specific date, and in fact should have happened many years ago, according to past predictions, especially around the year 2012, we are also being tricked into the illusion of 3D linear time. Personally, I have heard all these predictions, positive and negative, for the past 20 years repeatedly. There was a time I bought into some of them, getting caught up in future projections based on fear or misplaced hope. There is a reason why politicians use the slogan, "Hope we can believe in." In reality, they really only did one thing to me, distract me from my own inner guidance, my bodily intuition, and my own emancipation and embodiment process that would enable me to truly be the change. Our mind can come up with all kinds of what-if scenarios and projections, but it is caught in linear time, and cannot possibly foresee the future in detail, let alone map out our own unique soul purpose, the lessons we need to learn, and the talents we are here to develop as embodied individuals during this time of transition. Fear is literally an illusion, rooted in the fear of death, and stemming from ego identification. Danger can be real, but fear is ultimately a choice. The more you are concerned about possible future outcomes, the more you are living solely from your head and disconnected from your body, detached from the essentialness of the present, from nature and the divine within, and from your internal guidance system that is specific to you, and therefore, the more vulnerable you are to being manipulated via hyperdimensional injections and interferences. Most of the people who make or indulge in these kind of predictions are not integrated, not engaged in any sincere self-work, they lack emotional intelligence and are disembodied, mostly engaging in shadow projection. Some of them tend to make a good living off of the fear-mongering or savior promises. In the end, all of this prediction business only works in favor of the matrix controller, because they eat up the frequency you emit with all your worries and fears, or even emotionally charged hopes based on lies. Both do the same thing, they take away your own inherent power to be a co-creator in alignment with divine will, an active participant in your own emancipation process. I don't really pay much attention to 3D global politics anymore, nor do I keep up with any alternative news sites or the latest channeled message, or the latest whistleblower revealing the secrets of the Illuminati. I still keep an eye on some of it, but I don't get invested, nor do I feel the need to figure out every obvious false flag, or any other event on the global stage, in any great detail. The invisible thread that connects them all has become too obvious. Over the past few years I've started to increasingly experience life and reality on a different level that is hard to even put into words. I'm more and more grounded in the present moment, unconcerned about the past or future. By no means do I claim to have fully awoken, let alone achieved a real state of enlightened existence, but there have been internal changes within me, which reflect my outer reality, that are undeniable, resulting in an exponential increase in synchronicities. There is also more joy and simply contentment and gratitude in my heart. I'm feeling very grounded and very connected with nature. Yet, my personal emancipation and embodiment process continues, and there are always more lessons to learn. I don't make decisions out of my head, or through a thought process, as I once did, but rather, they arise through listening to my inner non-verbal guidance and bodily intuition more and more. There is also a deeper trust in life and the universe, that I'm being taken care of and supported, a clearer sense of just being a vessel for the divine which is doing its work through me, and all of us, and to which I humbly align with to the best of my current abilities. I still have my days when I get stuck in the head, get disconnected, or caught up in a thought loop, but it's not even close to the state of being I was in a few years back. I also sense, and feel, on an increasingly embodied level, the timeline reality split moving at full force. I see it in my immediate surroundings and in other people's lives as well, separations, breakdowns, breakthroughs, etc. We see it on the world stage, people partly awakening, partly disintegrating, some taking the red pill, others the blue pill, and some of them mistaking the blue for the red pill, but there is no judgment regarding either choice. So much is happening at the same time, which we cannot possibly grasp via the mind. As things speed up, it is important to slow down, sink into your gut or pelvic bowl, be present to what is, and the universe, nature, and the divine will open to you in ways you cannot possibly grasp intellectually, and in ways you could have never predicted. Be first. Then do. In alignment. Embrace the mystery of the unknown, and enjoy the ride. It's what you signed up for.